Is that on? He said yes. You know, every time I get up here behind this podium, I have a new appreciation for Johnny Coleman. Every Sunday, every week, week after week, he gets up here and gives us a lesson that's both inspirational and informational. How can he do that? I got a call Friday afternoon. Willie called me and he said, you know, Johnny's gone and Charlie was supposed to preach this Sunday, but Charlie's sick. And so he won't be there Sunday. Can you do the lesson? Now, usually when I do a lesson, when I stand behind the podium, I have a week to figure out what I'm going to say and how I'm going to say it. You know, if you go through this Bible from beginning to end, almost every page has a lesson that you can preach. But now, here it is, Friday night. All my kids are over and we're having a great time on on Christmas Eve. And I'm thinking, what am I going to preach on? What am I going to say? And so all day Saturday, I went through things that I should talk about. And finally Saturday night, when it's bedtime, I decide, okay, I'm going to talk about this. Well, now I have to arrange a lesson, a sermon. It's bedtime. And tomorrow night and tomorrow morning, you're going to have to do this. And so every time I do this, I appreciate the fact that Johnny Coleman every week gets up here and preaches a lesson that's both inspiring and informational. And it takes something to do that. You know, Johnny don't get up on Sunday morning and say, okay, I'm going to preach about this morning and da-da-da-da-da. He probably starts out on Monday, start trying to figure out what he wants to talk about and what he's going to say, and arrange it, make it 20 minutes long, because if it's 25, there's those folks out there that start doing this. And if it's only 15, well then, that ain't a good enough sermon. And so I can imagine that Johnny, having doing this 20-something years, wouldn't have near the hard time that I would have. But he still has a lot of things to do to put together a sermon that you can take home. You know, it's Johnny's intention that when he walks up here to the podium and delivers a lesson, he intends to give you something that you can take home with you and make you a better person. If he didn't intend to do that, he wouldn't be near as good as he is. And that's my intention. Anytime I teach back there in the classroom or stand up here and talk to people, it is my intention to give you something that'll inspire you to be a better person. If I didn't do that, if I spent 20 minutes just talking like I am right now and jabbering, I'd be wasting my time and yours. And so it's my intention that each of us, including myself, find something in a lesson that we can take home and make us a better person. When I was in high school, I took a class called speech. And it was an elective that I took for two reasons. The first reason was everybody told me it was easy to pass. And that's what I'm looking for. And the second reason was because that young lady that taught that class was the best looking girl I ever seen. But in spite of my ulterior motives, I learned a few things. Anytime you do a speech, there's three parts to that speech. There's the introduction, which is what I'm doing right now. And then there's the context. And then there's the close, the conclusion. And usually the conclusion coincides with the introduction. Don't worry about all that stuff. That ain't gonna happen today. You know, Christmas is over. We're done. And usually between Christmas and New Year's is when I start to examine what I did last year. Was it better than it was the year before? Was I a more mature person? A more Christian person than I was last year? And so we're going to talk a little bit today about New Year's resolutions. You know, a lot of people, every year they'll make a New Year's resolution. I'm going to be better at this than I was last year. Statistics tell us that by January the 15th, 97% of those people who made New Year's resolutions have already broke them. I'd like for us to think this morning about what we can do to be better people from now on. And we'll start out with the context of 2 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 5. That verse says, and this is Paul speaking, examine yourselves to see whether you are in the faith. Test yourselves. Paul tells us that we need to examine ourselves every once in a while just to see if we're still in the faith. He talks about how we should continue to grow continually, and the things we should do to be better Christians. Over in 2 Peter, Peter tells us to add to your faith goodness, and to add to goodness knowledge, and to knowledge self-control. And then he says, if we have these things in increasing measure. So he says we need to be continually growing and becoming better people. You know, everybody reaches a plateau in their life and in their Christianity where they don't grow much. A lot of us will get up to this point and then we just stay there. We don't get any better. And sometimes we'll go down a little bit and then we'll get back up and we feel closer to God when we're up on top. But a lot of times we never get over that plateau. And it's important that we do that. You know, Jesus was asked one time, what's the greatest commandment? And I don't think he had to think about that. I don't think he had to decide what the greatest commandment was. He said the greatest commandment is to love you, God, with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. If you think about what he just said, that means that we should honor God in all our life. We should focus our whole life on loving God. But so many times through the weeks and months through a year, we kind of forget about those things. And we start looking at our life and how we can improve our life. And we don't focus on God. And then Jesus said, the second greatest commandment is like unto the first. What does that mean, like unto? That means it's just like the first commandment. He said the second commandment is like unto the first. Love thy neighbor as thyself. How hard is that? If you really sit down and think about it, that's pretty hard. To love thy neighbor as thyself. Not to focus on yourself, but to focus on others. You see, in life there's three different kinds of things. There's those things that are most important in your life. And those things are the eternal things. God, Jesus Christ, the Bible, your faith, your love. All of those things are eternal. And they're the most important thing that you can ever think about. And then there's the important things. There's things that are important to you that are not eternal. Your husband or your wife, your kids, your family, your neighbors, how much money you make, what kind of car do you drive, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Those things are important. But they have nothing to do with eternity, because one of these days, all of those things are going to end. If we focus ourselves on the most important things in our life, those things that are eternal, then so many times the important things in our life, God takes care of. We don't even have to worry about them. And then we have things in our life that just fill up our life. They're not really important. Those things like fishing and hunting and going garage sailing and shopping, and all of those things fill up our life, but they're not really important. I mean, Barry could miss deer hunting one weekend, and I could not go fishing as much as I do. I could be more focused on God. And so as we go into this new year with new resolutions, I want you to think more about the eternal things than you do about the not eternal things. It's important that we think about our wife and our kids and our family and all of those things, but that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is that we get to heaven and take somebody else with us. You know, the last thing Jesus told his apostles is in Matthew chapter 28. He said, "Go ye therefore into all nations and preach the gospel, baptizing all those who believe in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit." Jesus said the second most important commandment is to love thy neighbor. And my question has always been, if you love your neighbor, if you love that friend or that person that you just met, how can you pass up telling them about Jesus? How can you just not say anything, knowing that they're not going to heaven? And so, my focus in life has always been, how do I get that person and that person and that person to go to heaven with me? You see, that's important. That's eternal. I, every year, try to have a home Bible study where people who are not religious oriented can come and we'll talk about God. And a lot of people will do that when they won't come to church. And I've found out lately that a lot more people will do that than used to. You know, when you preach the gospel, people who are depressed or don't have a great life are more susceptible to listen than people who do have a great life. A lot of people think, I don't need God, I got lots of money. But those people who have nothing, they're looking for something to give them faith and hope in the future. That's the reason when we go over to Ghana every year and Togo and those places, we come back telling everybody we've converted 1,200 people or 1,400 people. You could never do that in the United States because most people are not depressed enough to accept Jesus for who he is. I'm going to tell you a little story and then I'll close this out. And some of you have heard the story. A lot of people have told the story. Back a few years ago, down in Florida, a hurricane came by, but it didn't get on land. It just kind of went up the edge of Florida, created a huge wind and large waves. And a young couple walked out on the beach the next day after that hurricane. And all up and down the beach, as far as they could see, there were starfish scattered on the beach. And as they walked along looking at all those starfish, they happened up on an old man. And that guy was picking up a starfish, and he'd walk out about waist deep in the water and he'd throw that starfish in the water. Then he'd walk back and he'd pick up another starfish. And he'd walk out about waist deep and he'd throw that starfish in the water. And that young couple watched him for a little while. And finally, they just had to say something. And so they told that old man, "Sir, what you're doing is useless. You'll never make a difference. Look at all these starfish." And the old man stopped, looked at him, thought for a minute, reached down, picked up a starfish, carried it out about waist deep in the water, and throwed it in the water. Then he turned back to that couple and he said, "I made a difference to that one." The whole point of that story is we can't save everybody. There's some people we'll never meet. There's some people that we'll meet and they won't listen. But every once in a while, if we focus on helping our neighbor, every once in a while we'll find somebody who will listen. And when you do that, it's worth more than just talking to people. A lot of people are going to say no. But if you can pick up one starfish and save it, convert it into being a Christian, is that not worth the trouble? As we come into this new year, we think about all the things that happened last year. Let's set our hearts on finding people who need Christ and tell them about Christ. You know, there's three kinds of people. There's the person that does, and there's this person who watches you do, and then there's the person who don't care what you do. Let's resign ourselves to be the person who does. We need to go out and talk about Jesus Christ. I have every belief that if each one of us went out with a focus in our mind of telling people about Christ, I don't have a doubt that next year this whole building could be full of people. What's that worth? Well, it's kind of like the old man picking up starfish. It's worth a lot to that person because those are eternal things. And so as we come into this new year, as we make our New Year's resolution, let's think about what Jesus said was the greatest commandment. To love God with all your heart, all your mind, and all your soul. And to love your neighbor as yourself. There ain't nothing better than watching a person that you've converted, that you've told about Jesus. Ain't nothing better than looking up and seeing that person sitting on a Sunday morning church service. So, my conclusion to this speech, to this sermon, is as we go into next year, focus yourselves on what Jesus said were the two greatest commandments in the Bible. Love God, love your neighbor. If there's anybody that has anything that they need to ask the church about, now would be the time to do that. If you're not a Christian and you want to be, now's the time to do that. And so, as we close this out, if you have a need, come forward.